Hello and welcome to Spread Book Joy. In this Get Kids Reading series, I give you all the information that I find invaluable as a teacher when I'm looking for high quality but engaging books for children. Save yourself hours of reading and research time by watching one video. Make life even easier, I've put timestamps in the description below so you can skip to the most relevant parts of the video. I'm going to share with you some of my art experiments, so if you're a teacher you might want to try them with the children in class or just yourself to learn some new skills alongside me. I'm not an artist or an art teacher, which will become apparent when you see what I do, but hopefully it will give you something interesting to watch while I talk to you and maybe inspire you to try some art experiments of your own. So if you like children's books or just books, if you like art, then hopefully you'll find something to interest you here. Today's chat is all about the heartwarming debut novel, The Boy at the Back of the Class. I'm going to use some polymer clay and some acrylic paint to create some badges based on several key objects from the text. I'll tell you a little bit about the book and the author. I'll give you a short synopsis of the story, which means there will be spoilers, and I'll talk about the main themes and then offer you some ideas for use in class. I'm going to put out a trigger and content warning at the moment. The book, whilst it is a children's book, it does deal with some heavy issues including grief, trauma associated with fleeing war and bullying. If I've missed any others that other viewers think should be mentioned here, can you just put them in the comments below. The edition is paperback, published by Orion Publishers, $6.99, and it's illustrated by someone called Pippa Kernick. And I think the illustrations, not just the cover art, but the illustrations inside really add to the story. So there are parts of it where, for instance, one of the main characters has drawn pictures as part of a presentation they're giving to the class, and it just gives that additional bit of information and that additional bit of reality and dose of reality into the story. I also listened to the audiobook on Audible, and it was narrated by Imogen Wild, and really good. 5 hours, 4 minutes, and you could speed it up if you want to get through it a bit quicker. I started the book and finished it in one day, really. I started reading the book in the morning, and in the afternoon I listened to it while I was doing some other things around the house. It's a really nice read. So in terms of the length of the book, it's 290, nearly 300 pages. The type's quite big, so whilst it's not dense type, it's 300 pages but not very densely written, and it's so engaging and so conversational that I think you can get through it quite quickly. I mean, like I said, I read it really quickly sitting at home, read a bit of it myself in the paperback and then listened to the audiobook. The audiobook's only 5 hours, so that gives you some idea. It's not actually, whilst it's 300 pages, it's not that dense a text to get through, and I think you could get through it quite rapidly. Maybe a 3 or 4 week unit of work, a couple of weeks over story time, but I do think it's one of those books that you, as well as the children, will want to carry on reading and find out what happens next. I certainly couldn't put it down when I was reading it. I really enjoyed this book, and I think it's a really important book, and I think it's just really enjoyable as a story, let alone the important themes that it raises. The Book Trust recommends it for reading ages of 10 to 12, and I would say year 5 and 6. I'd push it for year 5, I think, rather than 6, mainly because I think the simplicity of the language involved. I think year 6 could be pushed a bit harder. The topics though are heavy and dense, and there's a lot of discussion to be had, so it would work for either year 5 or 6. The Book Trust also says there's an interest level of 7 to 12, and personally I think if you're going to read it with children younger than the age of 9, I think that's a parent's call really, rather than a school call. I don't think it's something you shy away from with younger children, the topics and the themes in this, but they're ones that I think will bring up a lot of questions for younger children, and not necessarily ones that you as a school might want to discuss as openly. You might want to leave that as a decision up to parents to discuss, because they can be quite intense discussions that come out of this, I'd imagine. I've not used this myself in school yet. I've only read it personally, and I'm definitely going to be using it at some point in school. I think it's worthy of a whole unit of work in English, a guided reading unit. I think it just makes a wonderful story time book. I've got some ideas for how to use it further on in the video. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today's art interpretation. I'm going to be making badges out of polymer clay using key objects from the text. And this is a really nice comprehension exercise. It's a wonderful way to get children to pick out what they think has meaning and talk about those objects and why they think they're important to the story. And I just love art as a comprehension exercise. I think it's fun for a start. It's much more fun than a worksheet and comprehension questions, certainly. And it's just pleasant, but also you're getting their understanding, their meaning. It's up to them to interpret and infer what they take from it, and everyone comes at a story differently. So I'm going to show you how I do that in the next clip. I'm going to cut away now while I talk about the author and the synopsis of the story, and hopefully you'll enjoy the footage while you listen. So some information about the author. The author is a woman called Onjali, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Onjali Rauf, and she was the founder of Making Her Story, which is a women's rights organisation where she tackled trafficking of women and children and girls in the UK and beyond. And her work took her to the Calais jungle, where she met a woman who was about to give birth, among many of the people that she met there, and was inspired to come back and share and spread the story of the refugee crisis. And the result is this wonderful book, The Boy at the Back of the Class. The book won lots of awards. It won the Blue Peter Book Award, which is a really big award here in the UK. Blue Peter's a children's programme over here, and it won the Waterstones Children's Book Prize for 2019. It was nominated for several other prizes, and that's really remarkable. One for a debut novel, but also for a novel from an author who is a BAME author. Still, I looked up, there was a wonderful article about her in The Guardian, which I'll put the link to below. I think it explains a lot about her background. She sounds like a really inspiring person and someone who would be wonderful for a school visit, for a World Book Day, or any other time of the year, actually. I think I would really make an effort to try and get her in I think she's London based, I might be wrong, but if she is and you're in London, try and get her in. I think she'd be an inspiring person to bring into school. But the article in The Guardian said that only 2% of authors are BAME in children's literature still. So diversity, there is a real lack of diversity in children's books still going on today in 2020, and you might not think that, but it's true. I think I've touched on it previously in another book when I spoke about sort of lack of representation in lead characters as well, and the lead characters in children's books, apparently 1% are BAME characters. So in terms of having a diverse author and diverse lead characters, this book really bucks the trend in a really positive way. So the story outline. The main character is narrating the story, and a primary school child in London who is sitting in class one day and says the most exciting thing has happened. There was an empty chair at the back of the class, and a new boy has come to fill that chair in that space because another child had left. So the narrator goes on to talk about their friends and their friendship group, and one of the big twists in the story is, and I didn't even notice, it's so well done, the author manages to take us through this entire story and doesn't really end up gender stereotyping the narrator or giving us any detail about their background until quite late on in the book. The narrator is the main character, is actually a girl called Alexa. You find out her name right at the very end of the book, and her background is mixed race. She is half Indonesian, half Austrian, and what she does is she spots the new boy sitting at the back of the class. He's very sad, and she just immediately has this empathy for him, and she thinks, if that was me, I'd be scared and frightened. I'd really want some friends. So she makes it her mission to become his friend, and each day her and her small group of friends, they try and approach him at the end of the day after school, because during the day he's placed in seclusion away from the other children. It's explained that this has happened during break time so that he can talk to someone about the trauma that he's experienced. Now, I've worked in London primary schools for some time. I've had experience of working with children who've come from the refugee camps and their families and integrating into school. And I've never known of this idea of seclusion. We try and integrate as much as possible with the families I've worked with in the past, so maybe it's something that just not happened at the schools I've worked at, but he's kept apart during playtimes and break times, and then so the only time they spot him is at the end of the day when he's going with his foster family, because they find out later that he's a refugee. His family, he got separated from them, he's come to the UK alone, away from his parents, and he's staying with a foster family. A TA starts in the class so that he can join in lessons and be one-to-one with him, and speaks Kurdish, because he speaks Kurdish. He's Syrian and he speaks Kurdish. So the children make it a real mission to become friends with him and to make him happy, and because she thinks, the main narrator thinks he's so sad and she can't bear to see anyone being as sad as he is. We also learn that the narrator lives at home with her mum, is a latchkey kid, and mum is a librarian, single parent, and it's revealed that the narrator's father had died some years before. So there's a lot about grief in the book, and Ahmet, who is the boy at the back of the class, his name is Ahmet, we find out his story, which is really tragic, and I won't go into it in too much detail here, but there is loss and separation, and he talks about, you know, living the journey from his home, then to the migrant camps, and then to the UK, and that's all revealed in the book. The characters are wonderful, actually. I think the narrator is engaging and disarmingly honest, and the way and telling us what the refugee crisis and the war effect on war and the perspective of a child, what that looks like when she learns about it, and how it's affected this boy. And then also how there are other deeper questions here going on. So whilst these lovely little group of children are trying to make friends with Ahmet, he's being bullied by other children in the school. And then there are conversations going on around the school gates about refugees and, you know, varying opposing views about whether they should be allowed to be in the country or not. And there are the narrator overhears all these arguments, and the narrator's innocence is one thing I really like about the book, but also she's providing, you know, she's an audience surrogate. So the narrator seems really innocent. She doesn't understand. She doesn't seem to have heard of the war in Syria. She doesn't seem to understand what a hijab is, and all of these things that she doesn't know about, which as a teacher in London, for me was quite surprising, but I get it. She's an audience surrogate because this book is aimed for as broad an audience as possible who might not have the experiences that that children in a London school actually have. So she is so innocent, but she points out lots of really valuable things. So one, that there are bullies in school, and that there are bullies that act to the teachers as if they're really lovely and kind, but then, and this is true, this happens for children, this is a real fear for them, and I think she's not shied away from that, the author, and I think that's really important. But then she also talks about the fact that adults can be bullies as well. There are not only children who are bullies, but there are adults who are bullies, and adults within schools who can be quite unfeeling towards children. And there's a teacher in the book whose behaviour, if you are a teacher, will just absolutely, you know, infuriate you. I think it's so well written, this book. I loved it. I couldn't put it down. It was really engaging. In terms of the themes, so many good themes. You know, it really addresses head on the refugee crisis and what it means to be displaced by war, and, you know, the bigger, wider conversation that the nation has to have around that. So as things go on forward, they find out that Ahmet is a wonderful footballer. He becomes a really good friend to them, and they find out that his family are still not in the UK, and he's still looking for them. They're still trying to find them, but they hear that, according to the local newspapers, that they want to close the gates, and all this sort of propaganda kind of language coming through, and how that's interpreted by a child. I think it's really it's important that it's discussed in this way, because this child hears this sort of talk of closing the gates, and she literally thinks that the gates are going to be closed somewhere into the UK, so his parents can't get in. So they concoct this amazing plan. They decide they're going to write to the Queen. She's going to help them, and they write to the Queen, but then they decide that that's not going to be quick enough. So she and another of the friends decide to go to Buckingham Palace. So they bunk off of school, they miss the day at school, they go to Buckingham Palace, and there's the changing of the guard is happening. And when the changing of the guard is happening, they decide they want to hand deliver this letter to the Queen. So she runs out and she's going to give the letter to one of the soldiers. And of course, given the tension around all these special kind of tourist spots, especially around Buckingham Palace, she's run out and it's treated as a security incident. It's captured on camera and the papers, are going mad about it. So some of them saying this lovely child's trying to find her friend's parents. Other papers are saying that it's a stunt, she's practically a terrorist. And then this is when we find out that the narrator is mixed race, because her mum has to explain to her when she's getting upset that people are calling her a possible terrorist, why they might be thinking that. So really, really heavy discussions had in this book, but done so well, so sensitively. I just defy anyone to read it and not be impressed with how this author has dealt with it. And then there is a happy ending. All's well that ends well. I'm not going to go into how it does end well. I bet you can imagine, but all's well that ends well. It does have a happy ending, so it's not all doom and gloom. It's very humorous, it's heartwarming, and I couldn't recommend it highly enough. The themes of the book are very dense, and there are a lot of themes that you can explore. There are themes on bullying and prejudice and racism and friendship and kindness and courage and bravery, and courage and bravery being the same thing, but also around issues that affect children today, living in a single parent family, grief and loss of a parent, and separation, as well as the big issues around the refugee crisis and what it means to be displaced and lose your parents, and immigration and politics and how that's affected in this country. I also think one thing that was really interesting to me was this theme throughout the book about rumour and propaganda. It starts off in the classroom where the children are trying to figure out about this new boy, why he's not with them, and all these rumours start that he's not with them at playtimes and break times because he's dangerous, or because he's naughty, or because there's something wrong with him. And that just shows you, rumours in schools. Children do love to, they do talk about all sorts of things. They then can make up some outlandish stories for things, and this shows you how easily rumours can spread and be listened to. And then there's the wider national picture about propaganda and newspapers. So when Alexa, the narrator, the main character in the story, I'd argue is her, and she runs out and she's, the newspapers splash this story all over the place and they call her a terrorist. And then there's one point where the taxi driver, who's very kind, who picks them up and takes them to Buckingham Palace, and he's very sweet and he's really kind, and he gives an interview on TV, and the newspaper person keeps trying to push him to say bad things about them, and he calls them on it. So not the newspaper person, the TV reporter. So there's the TV trying to take an angle on the news, and then they fight back by giving their own interview to someone that they trust. So it brings up lots of questions about the media and the manipulation of the truth and what people believe and who's pushing their agenda and why. And I think that is a really interesting angle to look at this story from, because that's something that our children have to live with. We live in a world of propaganda and accusations of fake news, and they are bombarded 24 hours a day with stories and news and gossip. And the way that the children respond to the newspapers saying that the gates are closing, they take it very very literally. There are gates in their heads, and the language of sensationalism, I think, is important to have that discussion with children. So I'd love to do some work around that as at least a lesson or two, that you would do a PSHE lesson around those things. You can also look at, as a part of ICT, being, IT literate and looking at the internet and what's real and what's not real. And I think that opens up a really valuable discussion. So yeah, some ideas that I thought of, and I'm sure you'll find online lots and lots of ideas for this book. It's going to be one of those books that you'll find in most primary schools at some point, and rightly so. It's a really good book. So I thought we could write a persuasive letter about refugees to the Prime Minister, and you could write an appeal to newspapers. You could do it, and you could do a newspaper report about the incident that happens in the book. You could write to the Queen. You could do persuasive letters to the Queen. You could do a recount of Ahmet's journey, though that could be really, really sad, but I think powerful as well. And yeah, just some of the ideas that I had for writing. I think there are far more things to explore in here than I could possibly do in a video right now, but it's definitely something that would be a fantastic stimulus for some PSHE work, and for Refugee Week I think it's perfect for those things. If you are looking for resources online, I had a quick look. I mean, this is how important the book has been seen to be. It's already got a CLP Power of Reading planning available, which is subscription only for schools. If your school has a Power of Reading subscription, I would be getting onto that. There is a Rising Stars book of planning, which is about £35 as well, which schools might want to use. And they also recommend it, I think, for year 5. So someone kindly has put up a whole series of work on TES, which looks to be really engaging, and some good reviews for only £8. So you've got a whole series of lessons and screens and things like that. Please let me know if you have used this book in class and how it went. The author has a new book out at the moment called The Star Outside My Window, which I think deals with domestic violence from the perspective of a child. And if she's handled it as sensitively and as well as she did with The Boy at the Back of the Class, then it will be well worth purchasing. I'm definitely going to get that one, and if it's as good as The Boy at the Back of the Class, I'll do a video on that as well. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and recommend it to anyone who might find it useful. Most importantly, please do spread some book joy of your own wherever you can. Bye!